I'm recording in class today as we go over. This is week 13, day 1. All right, we ready? So for number 1, we're showing the relationship between addition and multiplication with fractions. So I noticed at the top of your papers, though, there's a mistake. Did y'all notice that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1/3, not 4? Okay, so there are actually 5/3. So here at the top, you can just change it. It's 5 times 1/3, which equals 5/3, not 4/3. So you can make that correction in your example. My bad. Okay, next one. Show the relationship between addition and subtraction. Now we're going to use 6/4. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 1/4, adding those together, which would equal 6/4. Or you can multiply 6 times 1/4. Remember, that's the same as 6 over 1 times 1/4. And when I multiply, remember, I go straight across. Right? So 6 times 1 is 6, and 4 times 1 is 4. Thank you, Sinai. All right. Write 47 and 302,000ths in expanded form using a decimal. So the first part is, hello, friends.
4 times 10.
4 times 10 plus
7 times 1.
plus
3 times
1/10. Good. Plus 2 times 1,000th. Thank you, Kim. Being loud. All right, and now using fractions. Same thing. 4 times the place value, which is 10. 7 times.
1.
Good. Plus.
3 times 1 or 10.
Good. Plus.
2 times 1,000.
Or 1,000th. Good. Thank you. My loud voice is over here. Jacob, appreciate it. All right. The Amazon River is 1 7/10 times longer than the Mississippi. The Mississippi River is 2,340 miles. About how long is the Amazon River? Ooh, you know one thing that Miss Guilford didn't notice? It says about. So what was it really asking me for? It was really asking me to estimate. I could round 1 7/10 to 2 and just double my answer, but if you did an exact, you would get 3,978 miles. But I'm going to go ahead and change that because I'm going to leave that exact. I didn't notice this about, and that about is really important. That means for me to estimate. So I've got 2,340, and I'm going to double it. How did I double it? Multiplying it by 2, because 1 7/10 is about 2. So that's 0, that's 8, that's 6, and that's 4. So, ooh, doubling it gives me way off. Look at the exact compared to estimate. Huge difference?
Yes.
Huge difference. All right. Next one. Draw a model of 10/4. So the first thing I did was I made a fourth, and then or a whole, and split it into fourths, and then I shaded it in, and that only gave me 4/4. So I needed another model, and I shaded that all the way in, and that gave me 8/4. And then I made another model, and I split it into fourths, and I shaded in 2 more tenths because that gave, fourths, because that then gave me 10/4. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So another way of calling 10/4 is 2.5, or what's the other way? I could do cowboy in the house, horse is out. That would be 2 times, subtract, that gives me 2 left over. My whole number's on top, numerator, denominator, and then I just have to reduce, and that gives me 2.5. So there are multiple ways I could solve this problem. Yes? Modeling, doing the math, looking at my model. How many whole models do I have? 2, and how much is the other? 2/4, or I could also call it half of a model, right? That's half, so 2.5. All right, next one. And for those of y'all wondering, when you see the video, this little button that says record doesn't show up on your side, okay? It's just on the screen, so sorry if it's in your way while we're going over. All right, list all the factors of 25. What are they? 1 times 25 and 5 times 5, and I don't need to repeat the 5, right? I don't need 2 5s. All right, what about 30? 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 5 times 6. All right, and so their common factors
are 5.
and
1
1, and then their greatest one, like Jesus said, is 5. Good. All right, day 2, I have a model. So I split up a half into tenths, and I showed equivalents by shading in 5 of those tenths. Now I'm going to do the same thing with 3/4 and prove how it could be equivalent. So what did I do is I split this up into fourths, just like that, to follow this model. And then I split these fourths into halves. So that gave me eighths. Do we agree?
Yes.
Okay, and then I shade it to show equivalence, and that gave me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eighths. So 6/8 is equivalent to 3/4. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Y'all still with me?
Yes.
Am I going too fast?
No.
A little bit?
No.
Okay. It's all right. Next one. A fraction represents division. The line between the numerator and denominator means out of, or divided by, or shared equally among. All of these words we see in our division word problems, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what we just worked on with recognizing that fractions are division. It's the exact same thing that we had for homework last night. Okay, so 3 divided by 4 also is 75 hundredths. Well, let me show you how. What is this? How do I set this up? 3 divided by 4 is 3/4. Do we agree? Yep. And so my 3 is my cowboy. It goes in the house. My 4 is my horse. It goes outside. I know I cannot get any groups of 4 from 3, so there's my 0, and then I drop a decimal and annex zeros. Okay? Now I annex 1 0, and that gives me 30. 4 times 7 gives me 28. Do we see that? And so then I subtract, that gives me 2, annex another 0, and now that's 20, and 4 times 5 gives me 20. Subtract, and now I'm at 0, so I can stop, and that's how I got the decimal 75 hundredths. So let's see, can I do the same thing that I did for 2/5? Well, 2/5 means 2 out of 5, or 2 divided by 5. So what I did was I put my 2 in the house, my horse outside. I realized I can get 0 groups of 5 from 2, annex a 0 after I place a decimal, that becomes 20, and 5 times 4 is 20. So I get 4/10 as a decimal answer for 2/5. So if any of you have ever tried to do your homework on a calculator and you're trying to divide and you're like, this just gave me a decimal, what do I do? Well, that's the reason why. It's not going to give you a fraction and tell you the answer is 2/5. It's going to tell you the answer is 4/10. Okay? Does that make sense? It's going to annex zeros on the back. Yeah, it's happened to me too in 4th grade. Okay, so using only mental math, I see a decimal out here. I have to multiply that 6/10 times 10 to get rid of the decimal. So whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I multiply this by 10, that gives me 18,000 now, and divided by 6. And this is mental math, right? So that means no calculator. So 6 can go into 18 how many times?
3 times.
And since my answer is 18,000, I know that there's 3 zeros I annex, so the only answer it could be is 3,000. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Next one, it says find the difference between 5 and 7/8 and 1 and 5/8. So I shaded in 5 and 7/8. Then I got rid of 1 and 5/8. Why? Because I subtracted. So if I'm subtracting it, I can cross it out. So I crossed out 1 and 5/8, and that left me with 2/8 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 and 2/8, which I could reduce to 4 and 1/4. So what's the correct answer? 4 and 1/4. Okay? Divisibility rule. Circle the numbers that are divisible by 5. A number is divisible by 5 if it ends in 5 or 0. Simple enough, right? Okay? So, yes, yes, no, yes, yes. Good job. All right, so that's it for days 1 and 2. All right, flip it over. Estimated sums or difference. This is rounding to the nearest whole. So, oop, that looks like a decimal. That was me carrying. That was a 1. All right, so I lined up my numbers. This rounded to 1, 7, 731, and that rounded to 73. That gave me 812. Notice that my exact is very close, 812 and 141 hundredths. You do have to line up your decimals, okay? Next one, we didn't forget this, did we?
No.
Okay, so 5/10 one way, 7/10 the other. Count up my product, and 5 times 7 gives me 35. I have 2 decimal places. If I were to count that, it would be 35 hundredths. So decimal 35 is my answer. We got that? Nobody forgot how to model decimals, did they?
No.
Good, because we're going to do the same thing with fractions in a little bit. Okay, number 3, use the strategy of the algorithm to produce any strategy or the algorithm to find the product. I always like to use lattice. That's just my thing. It's my jam. So I multiplied and I got 5, 5, 2, 7, 5. But then I looked back up and I realized I have 2 decimal places here, 1 decimal place there, for a total of 3 decimal places. And so now I've got to go back in my answer and slide my decimal in 3 times, and that gives me 55 and 275 thousandths. Okay? Questions? All right, this one. 1/4 of the points scored by Discovery High School football team were made in the first 10 minutes. 1/4. So that means 1/4 times however many points were scored in the first 10 minutes. If DHS scored 36, oh, so now I learned it was 36. So it's 1/4 times 36, and I'm going to make it a fraction over 1. 36 points in the entire game. How many points were scored in the first 10 minutes? So in the first 10 minutes of the game, I'm going to multiply. 1 times 36 is 36, and 1 times 4 is 4, and 36 divided by 4 equals 9. So my answer is 9 points.
Yes.
Okay? We got that? Okay? Number 1. Oh, wait, down here. Write 3 equivalent fractions. So could I reduce to make an equivalent fraction? Yep, I'm going to reduce. Divide 2 by 2 and it gives me 1. Divide 6 by 2 and it gives me 3. So 1/3 is my first equivalent fraction. I could multiply to make it bigger. I'm going to multiply by 2 over 2. So 2 times 2 is 4. 6 times 2 is 12. Now I'll do 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 3 is 18. So all of these are equivalent fractions. I have 1/3, 4/12, and 6/8. I'm sorry, 6/18. All 3 are equivalent. Any questions?
No.
Good. All right, next one. What is the quotient when dividing 112 by 8/10? So the first thing I had to do was change this from a decimal to a whole number. So I multiply both sides by 10. That gives me 1,120, and that gives me 8 over here. Now I can divide. We got that?
Yes.
I used the box method. I put my 1, my 2, and then my new 0 in a box also, because I needed it. And then I divide it by 8. 8 can go into 1, 0 times. I slid my 1 over. Now it became 11. 8 can go into 11 1 time. Subtract 8 from 11, and that gives me 3. I slid my 3 over, and that gave me 32 in this box. 8 times 4 is 32, so that's going to zero me out. So I slide my other 0 over. 8 can go into 0 0 times. So that gives me a total of 140. Any questions about that one? That should be a good review on dividing decimals. Okay, bless you. All right, draw a model to prove your answer. So 2 2/3. So I drew 2 models and 2/3. And notice I split each model into thirds. Yes?
Yep.
Okay, and so I shaded in 2 whole models and then 2/3 of another model. But I'm adding 2 2/3 plus 5, so that means I need 5 whole models. And I didn't have to split these in thirds, but because these were thirds, whenever I add fractions, what do I want to have? Common denominators. Okay, so I split these into thirds also, and then I added it all up. 5 plus 2 makes 7, and then 2/3. So my answer is 7 2/3. We got that?
Yep.
Okay. Yay. All right, number 3. Ron can run a mile in 12 minutes. It takes his younger brother Sam 1.5 times longer to run a mile. How long does it take Sam to run a mile? So all I'm going to do is take Ron's time and multiply it times 1.5. And that gave me 180. But I had 1 decimal, so I slid my decimal in. So how long does it take him to run? 18 minutes.
That's a long time.
It is. Okay? We ready? $85 divided by 100.
It's 8,500.
85 hundredths. Remember, it's the same as multiplying times 100th. All the way down at the bottom. It's the same. 85 divided by 10 is the same as multiplying by a tenth. 8 5/10. 85 divided by 1 is going to give me 85. It's the same as multiplying by 1. Right across. 85 divided by 1/10 is the same as multiplying it by 10. So 850. And dividing 85 by 100th is the same as multiplying it by 100, and it gives me 8,500. When the divisor is less than 1, the quotient is larger. Got it? All right, and then solve using order of operations. I have brackets, I have parentheses, I have multiplication, I have subtraction, I have addition. Got a lot of things going on in here. So what do I need to do? I'm going to write GMDAS. Do I have groupings?
Yes.
A lot of them. I've got brackets and parentheses. So inside I have 2 sets of parentheses, and that pretty much means I can solve them both at the same time. So 9 minus 4 is 5, and 7 plus 2 is 9. So I wrote those, and I rewrote my parentheses, or my brackets. Subtract 13 plus 7. Now I have a multiplication sign. According to this, I'm still solving my grouping, so there's still whatever is left in the grouping gets solved first, regardless of what it is. That gives me 45. My groupings now fall off. I'm done with groupings. Do I have any exponents?
No.
No. Multiplication or division?
Yes.
Nope. What do I have? Addition and subtraction. And remember, I solve these left to right, so whichever comes first. So 45 minus 13 comes first, and that gives me 32 plus 7. Okay, and now all, of course, I have left over, and that gives me 39. So 39 is my final answer.